Can you even afford to eat here? My sister sneered, her voice dripping with amusement. The flicker of candlelight danced across her diamond earrings as she leaned back, swirling her wine like she owned the room. The rest of the table laughed softly, polite, rehearsed laughter that echoed against the soft jazz and the clinking of crystal glasses. I smiled faintly, resting my fingers on the edge of the napkin. I think I'll manage. Mother gave me that look, the kind she'd perfected over decades, half pity, half disdain. We're just surprised you said yes to dinner here, darling. It's quite an expensive place, quite expensive. The same phrase they used for everything that didn't fit their version of me. The restaurant shimmered in golden light, the hum of conversation blending with the scent of rosemary and butter. Every detail of this place felt familiar. The linen, the pattern of the plates, even the way the candles were arranged at the center of each table. Yet sitting among them, I felt like an outsider in my own world. My father cleared his throat, cutting into his steak with surgical precision. So, Eliza, how's that? Cooking thing going? I swallowed the lump in my throat. It's going well, Dad. Cooking, my mother repeated with a sigh, as though the word itself were distasteful. Such a humble profession, but I suppose someone has to do it. My sister Claire smirked, tapping her manicured nails against her glass. Maybe one day you'll cook for someone important, huh? Then you can finally tell people you've made it. Their laughter rippled across the table, light and cruel. I took a sip of my water, forcing a calm smile. Maybe. The truth pressed against my ribs, hot and restless, but I swallowed it back. Tonight wasn't about proving anything. It was about remembering how it felt to sit among them, the family who had cut me out of their world 5 years ago, now laughing in the restaurant that bore my name on its menu. Nathan, Claire's fiancé, glanced around. This place is stunning. The food's incredible. We should compliment the chef later. Oh yes, my mother said, nodding approvingly. People who work hard in these places rarely get appreciation. It's a pity, really, all that talent wasted in a kitchen. Something in me ached, not anger, but something deeper. Grief, maybe. For the years I spent trying to earn the love sitting across from me now, wrapped in judgment and silk. The waiter approached, setting down another round of dishes. He bowed slightly, his tone perfectly polite. Is everything to your liking? Claire gave a little shrug. It's fine, she said, in that effortless, privileged way that made everything sound beneath her. My father nodded. Tell the chef he did well. For a place this expensive, it should be, the waiter smiled, eyes flickering toward me for a brief, knowing second before he turned away. I lowered my gaze, tracing the rim of my glass as laughter rose again around me. The air felt thick, too heavy with perfume, too polished to breathe, and I thought, not for the first time, how strange it was to be both invisible and the center of everything at once. Before the night of that dinner, before the stares and the wine and the laughter, there was always them, the Rowans. My family, a perfect picture framed in polished silver. All smiles and expectations. I grew up in Greenwich, where everyone's lawn looked manicured enough to be in a magazine, and every secret was wrapped in cashmere and kept behind French doors. My father, Jonathan Rowan, built his fortune in finance, a man who could measure worth in numbers, not hearts. My mother, Catherine, carried herself like a woman born to be admired, her voice always calm, her judgments always final. And then there was Claire, my older sister, the golden child, the kind of daughter every neighbor adored, every teacher praised. She played piano, spoke French, and looked flawless in every family photo. I was the quiet one standing beside her, smiling too hard, holding my breath. Claire's the beauty, people would say. Eliza's the sweet one? Sweet? That was the word they used when they meant ordinary. At home, love wasn't something you felt. It was something you earned, with grades, achievements, or charm. Claire had all three. I had an apron and a dream. I still remember the first time I told my mother I wanted to be a chef. I was 12, standing on a stool in the kitchen, helping Elena, our housekeeper, whisk eggs for Sunday breakfast. You love this? Elena asked, smiling as I carefully folded the batter. I nodded, wide-eyed. It feels like magic. But when my mother walked in and saw me covered in flour, her expression froze. Eliza, she said sharply, put that down. The kitchen is no place for a Rowan. I laughed nervously, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. To her, cooking was servitude. To me, it was art. As years passed, the divide grew wider. Claire went to Yale. Ethan, my younger brother, followed father's footsteps into banking. I was sent to business school, not because I wanted to, but because it was the Rowan way. But even then, I would sneak into late-night cooking classes at community centers, burning my hands, ruining recipes, feeling more alive than I ever did in lecture halls. When I finally told them I was leaving my MBA program to study culinary arts, my father didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He just said, "You're embarrassing this family, Eliza." Mother's silence hurt more than anything. She didn't even look at me, just folded her napkin neatly, like she was erasing me from her life. That night, I packed a single suitcase. No one stopped me. I thought I'd cry as I left, but I didn't. The tears came later, in a tiny apartment above a noisy street, with a leaky faucet and a mattress on the floor. I cooked instant noodles and told myself it was just another recipe. I'd get it right next time. When you walk away from everything you've ever known, you think the hardest part will be leaving. It isn't. The hardest part is what comes after, when no one looks for you. The first few months were brutal. I worked in a small diner in Queens, the kind where grease clings to the air and your clothes always smell like burnt oil. My shifts stretched 18 hours a day, chopping, frying, cleaning, repeating. My hands blistered, my back ached, and the tips barely paid rent. But every night, after closing, when everyone else went home, I stayed behind. I experimented, mixing spices, trying sauces, tasting, failing, trying again. I ruined more dishes than I could count. Still, every mistake felt like a lesson, every burn a badge of freedom. One winter night, after a 12-hour shift, the manager asked me to stay late. A VIP had arrived unexpectedly. "Cook something simple," he said. "Just make it edible." The kitchen was chaos, but I remember exactly what I made. Roasted duck breast with honey glaze, caramelized figs, and thyme butter. It wasn't perfect. The plating was rushed, but it was mine. When I brought the dish out, the man at the corner table looked up. He was older, sharp-eyed, wearing a chef's coat with a silver pin that gleamed under the light. He didn't say much at first. Just took a bite, then another. Then he stood, walked into the kitchen, and straight toward me. "Who made this?" he asked. I froze. "I did, sir." He studied me for a moment, then smiled faintly. "What are you doing here?" "Working," I said simply. He shook his head. "No, what are you doing here? I'm wasting your gift in a place that doesn't deserve it." I blinked, unsure what to say. "My name is Chef Laurent Duval," he continued. "I run Atelier Duval. You've heard of it, yes?" My jaw almost dropped. Of course I had. 3 Michelin stars, one of the most respected chefs in the world. "I have a position opening," he said, handing me a card. "You'll start as a commis if you can keep up. It won't be easy, but if you stay, I'll make you great." And just like that, my life split in two. Before that night and after. I stared at his card for hours after he left, afraid to believe it was real. But the next morning, I packed my knives, cheap ones, slightly dull, and took the subway to Manhattan. At Atelier Duval, I learned what real kitchens were. Fire, rhythm, pressure, precision. The chefs there didn't talk much. They communicated in cuts, flames, and glances. And for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Not because of my name, but because of what I could create. That night, after my first service, I burned my hand on a pan and hissed in pain. Chef Laurent walked by, glanced at the burn, and said quietly, "Good, now you're a cook." And I smiled, because he was right. 5 years. That's how long it took for me to turn scars into stars. At Atelier Duval, I worked harder than I ever had in my life. While others slept, I peeled vegetables, washed dishes, studied recipes, memorized every sauce and technique. My hands bled, my back screamed, but I refused to give up. Chef Laurent was tough, sometimes cruel, but he taught me everything. "Perfection isn't a moment, it's a habit," he'd say, as he inspected my plating under harsh white light. And I learned to breathe under pressure, to thrive in chaos. Eventually, I rose through the ranks, from commis to line cook to sous chef. When the restaurant earned its 3rd Michelin star again that year, he handed me a glass of champagne and said, "You've earned your fire. Eliza, it's time you light your own." And so I did. With the small savings I'd scraped together and Chef Laurent's quiet endorsement, I opened Maison Rowan, a modest restaurant tucked in a quiet Manhattan street. I poured everything into it, my memories, my hunger, my defiance. The first menu I wrote was called Roots, inspired by the dishes I used to make secretly in my parents' kitchen. The reviews came slowly at first. A few local blogs, then Food and Wine, then the New York Times. They called my food honest, bold, unapologetic. Within a year, Maison Rowan was fully booked for months in advance. And my family? They had no idea. They thought I was still working somewhere small, probably barely making ends meet. I didn't bother correcting them. Then, one winter afternoon, a familiar envelope arrived. Ivory paper, gold lettering, the Mitchell family crest embossed at the top. My heart tightened as I read the words. Heather Mitchell and James Reynolds cordially invite you to their engagement celebration. Hosted at Maison Rowan, my restaurant. For a full minute, I just stared at the invitation, torn between disbelief and laughter. Of all the places in New York, Heather had chosen mine, completely unaware of whose table she'd be dining at. The irony was delicious. I thought about ignoring it, pretending it never happened. But then, something inside me, that quiet voice that used to whisper you'll never be enough, told me to go. Not out of revenge, but to face the ghosts I'd left behind. On the night of the event, I dressed simply. Black dress, tied hair, no makeup but red lipstick. As I arrived, I stood outside for a moment, watching through the glass. The restaurant glowed softly under the golden lights, filled with laughter, music, and clinking glasses. My staff, my family, worked with precision and grace. And inside, at the center table, my parents and Heather sat, laughing as if the world belonged to them. They didn't know whose world they were sitting in. Not yet. The restaurant shimmered with gold and glass, a soft jazz melody weaving through the air. The chandeliers sparkled like captured stars, their light glinting off champagne flutes and diamond bracelets. I stood by the window for a moment, taking it all in, the laughter, the clinking of forks, the faint scent of truffle butter drifting from the kitchen. It was a beautiful night. Perfect even. Perfectly fake. Claire walked in like a queen returning to her throne, her arm linked with her fiancé's. Her laughter cut through the hum of conversation, bright, rehearsed, flawless. And then she saw me. Well, well, she said, smiling with her teeth but not her eyes. I'm surprised you could afford to dine here, Liz. Do they pay cooks that well? Laughter rippled across the table. Polite, cruel. My father chuckled lowly, my mother hid her smirk behind a glass of wine. The old sting burned deep inside my chest, but this time it didn't reach my eyes. I raised my glass slowly, letting the ruby red wine swirl. I manage, I said softly. They didn't hear the steel beneath my calm. Throughout dinner, I watched them, the way they ordered, complained, and praised the dishes without knowing who had created them. My staff moved gracefully between tables, executing every course like a symphony. It was my kitchen, my vision, my dream breathing before me. When the last dessert was served, Claire leaned toward her fiancé, giggling. At least the food is decent. Maybe they finally hired someone who knows what they're doing. My lips curved. Maybe they did, I murmured, and then came the check. Her fiancé glanced at it, brows furrowed. That's strange, he said. They didn't charge for the main course. Confused silence spread around the table. My father frowned. Probably a mistake. Call the waiter. A moment later, the restaurant manager approached. Crisp suit, steady voice. He bowed slightly, eyes kind but knowing. No mistake, sir, he said clearly. Miss Eliza has already covered it. Welcome back, owner and head chef of Maison Rowan. For a second, the world went still. The clinking, the laughter, even the music, all faded into silence. My father's jaw slackened. My mother blinked rapidly, color draining from her face. Claire's smile faltered, then vanished completely. I set my wine glass down, the crystal ringing softly. You once said cooking was servants' work, I said, my voice even. But tonight you've all dined at my table. No one moved. No one breathed. Claire's eyes trembled, her manicured hand gripping the edge of her chair. My father stared at the untouched dessert, his throat tight with shame. My mother looked away, blinking hard. I stood, smoothing my dress, the faint rustle of fabric filling the silence. Thank you for coming, I said gently. It means more than you think. And then I turned toward the kitchen doors. My doors, where warmth and laughter and life waited. Behind me, the family that once disowned me sat frozen in the glow of the chandeliers, realizing that the daughter they'd cast out had built a world far beyond their reach. It had been 3 days since the dinner. 3 days since my family's laughter turned into stunned silence. Maison Rowan was quiet that morning. The hum of the espresso machine, the soft clatter of pans in the kitchen, the faint aroma of butter and rosemary seeping through the air. It was my sanctuary, the world I'd built brick by brick. I was reviewing the menu for the weekend when the front door opened. My assistant whispered, "Your family's here." I didn't need to look up to know who it was. I could already hear my mother's heels, my father's nervous cough, Claire's quick, uneven breath. They stood there awkwardly, the same people who once told me I'd ruined my life. Now they looked smaller somehow, their confidence stripped away like old paint. "Liz," my mother began, clutching her purse like a shield. We didn't know. If we had, we would've what? I asked softly. "Treated me better?" Her mouth opened, then closed again. My father looked at the floor. Claire took a step forward, her eyes glossy. "You embarrassed me," she said quietly. "In front of everyone," I almost laughed. "I didn't embarrass you, Claire. You did that all by yourself." She flinched, and for a moment I saw something unfamiliar on her face. Guilt. "Real guilt. I didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered. "I was just following what Mom and Dad wanted," I sighed. The anger I once carried so fiercely had cooled into something steadier, clearer. "You all wanted me to be like you," I said. "But I never wanted your life. I just wanted you to believe mine was worth something too." My father finally spoke, his voice low. "We were wrong, Eliza." It was strange hearing that. An apology from the man who'd said Mitchells don't cook. We command. He looked older now, frailer, as if pride had been the thing keeping him upright all these years. "I don't hate you," I said after a long pause, "but I can't pretend nothing happened. If we're going to start over, it has to be on new terms. Respect, not judgment." My mother nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Claire sniffled and murmured, "I'll try." I believed her, not because she deserved it, but because I finally did. As they left, my mother turned back one last time. "You've made something extraordinary, Liz." For once, I didn't hear condescension, only awe. When the door closed behind them, I walked back into my kitchen. My sous chef was plating pastries, humming softly. The morning light spilled across the counter, warm and golden, like forgiveness itself. I tied my apron, smiled, and whispered to myself, I built this life from nothing. And this time it's mine, all of it. That night, after closing the restaurant, I stayed behind. The lights were dim, the tables empty, the air filled with the faint perfume of roasted herbs and red wine. I walked slowly through Maison Rowan, my home, my story, carved into every wooden beam and glass panel. 5 years ago, I'd walked away from everything that was supposed to define me, my family's money, their name, their approval. Back then I thought I was losing everything. But tonight, surrounded by the quiet hum of my own creation, I finally understood. I hadn't lost a thing. I'd only found myself. I ran my fingers along the marble counter, remembering all the nights I'd stood there, exhausted, covered in flour, questioning if I'd made a mistake. The burns on my hands, the sleepless weeks, the tears no one saw, they were all part of the recipe that made me who I am. Outside, the city glittered like a constellation of second chances. When I stepped out into the alley behind the restaurant, the wind was cool and smelled faintly of salt from the river. I closed my eyes and breathed it in. For years, I'd wanted my parents to say, "We're proud of you." But now, I didn't need it. Pride had become something quieter, simpler, the kind that came from standing in your own truth. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Claire. "Dinner next week? Just us, no expectations." "I'll bring dessert," I smiled. Maybe forgiveness wasn't a grand gesture. Maybe it was just a door cracked open, a conversation waiting to happen. I looked up at the sky, a wash of deep indigo sprinkled with city light, and whispered to myself, I'm finally free. I thought about the girl I used to be, sitting in the back of her parents' mansion, sketching recipes on napkins, dreaming of flavors no one cared about. If I could tell her anything now, it would be this. You don't need permission to become who you are. I walked home that night with my coat draped over my shoulders, the air crisp, the streets alive with laughter from people spilling out of bars and late-night cafes. Somewhere in the distance, a street musician was playing an old jazz tune, slow, hopeful, a little bittersweet. When I reached the corner, I turned back once more to look at Maison Rowan. The sign above the door gleamed under the lamplight, elegant and steady, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't thinking about what anyone thought of me. I wasn't trying to prove anything, I was just content. I whispered to the night, my voice barely a breath. True wealth isn't measured in money or names. It's the courage to stand alone and still feel whole. The wind carried the scent of rosemary and rain. I smiled and kept walking toward whatever came next.